On November 11, 2004, a Nashville, Tennessee jury returned a verdict in the total amount of $105 million against the Daimler Chrysler Corporation, alleging seatbacks in Daimler minivans were unsafe, defective, and unreasonably dangerous. The case involved injuries to and the death of an 8-month-old child, Joshua Flax, in a rear-end collision which occurred in Davidson County, Tennessee, on June 30th, 2001. Joshua was injured when his grandfather's 1998 Dodge Caravan minivan was hit in the rear. The front passenger seat back collapsed backward and the passenger's head hit Joshua's forehead, fracturing his skull. Joshua died the next day. Today, the Insider Exclusive will show how George Freihofer and Lee May of the law firm of Butler, Wooten, Freihofer won this historic $105 million verdict by proving that Daimler had known for over 20 years that these seats are deadly dangerous and never warned anybody. How for over 20 years Daimler and Chrysler had been marketing minivans as safe family vehicles despite evidence to the contrary by their own safety experts. How in 1992, when Chrysler appointed a minivan safety leadership team to investigate safety problems with its minivans, that same team concluded that the seatback problem needed to be fixed immediately and criticized Chrysler for not doing so. How Chrysler also ordered Paul Sheridan, the safety team's chairman, to destroy all the safety team's records and then fired him. Chrysler sued Sheridan for $82 million in an attempt to muzzle him. Chrysler never collected a dime from Sheridan. I'm Steve Murphy, and this is the Insider Exclusive, live from Atlanta, Georgia, at the Butler, Wooten, Freihofer firm. Today we have a very interesting case. It's Flax versus Daimler Chrysler. It's a wrongful death case, and it's a product liability case also. And today I have with us the lawyers on the case who worked real diligently to get a $105 million verdict. They're joining me today, Lee May and George Freihofer. How are you? Of the law firm of Butler, Wooten, Freihofer. This was a tragic case. Real tragic case. Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, the case involved the death of an 8-month-old child, and the wreck that started this case happened in June 30th, 2001 in an area outside of Nashville, Tennessee. The baby's mother, Rachel Spartman, her parents, the baby's grandparents, and 2 family friends were in their 1998 Chrysler minivan. They had just pulled out of a residential driveway, had straightened out, and were struck from behind by a pickup truck driven by a man named Louis Stockel.
And this truck wasn't driving particularly fast, was it?
It was not. In fact, the experts in the case calculated the change in velocity involved in the wreck to be anywhere from 17 to 19 miles an hour.
Okay.
But despite this low speed, when the vehicle was hit from behind, the 2 front seats collapsed rearward. And when the front passenger seat collapsed, the head of the person in that collapsed seat struck the head of the 8-month-old child, Joshua. And even though Joshua was properly restrained in his child seat, with that head moving rearward like it caused a skull fracture and a brain injury, and Joshua died the next day at the hospital.
What you found out in this case was that this particular seat on the Dodge, it was a Caravan, right?
Correct.
Was probably the most unsafe seat made in any SUV or minivan, wasn't it?
It certainly was the weakest seat of all the minivans that we were aware of, and Chrysler knew for 20 years
right.
that its seats were collapsing in all of its rear impact crash testing.
We have a chart that we're showing on right now that Daimler manufactures a Mercedes and a variety of other high-end luxury vehicles, and they had stronger seats in those particular vehicles than they did in this Caravan, didn't they?
Right. Mercedes-Benz seats don't collapse. in rear impacts. And Chrysler and Daimler and Mercedes have known for many years that the seat is a very important piece of safety equipment in the vehicle. And a lot of people might not really understand this, but if your seat collapses in a rear crash, all kinds of terrible things can happen to you. First, if you're the driver, when your seat collapses, when you're hit from behind, you go sliding out from under your seat belt backwards and into the back seat, or you could hit the headliner above the rear window in the back of the vehicle. And there have been a lot of people that have gotten catastrophic neck and head injuries and been killed when their own seats have collapsed and they've flown into the back seat. In addition, if you have a child behind you, as happened in this case, when that seat collapses, the occupant in the front, their head smashes into the child's head and can either kill or catastrophically brain damage the child in the case.
And I understand that the child's mother, Joshua's mother, was in that same seat next to him when this event happened, and she saw it happen right in front of her.
Right, she observed it. She was sitting right next to him and saw it happen.
Yeah.
And basically, after the seat collapsed and the occupant in the front seat smashed into Joshua's head, and the occupant in the front seat was belted. Everybody in this vehicle was belted, doing what they were supposed to be doing, where they were supposed to be doing it. And when that seat collapsed and his head hit Joshua's head, it left Joshua with a hole in the front of his head the size of a golf ball, and his mother was sitting there to witness that.
One of the amazing things that I found in this case was I understand that Chrysler, in their own test, discovered that this seat, this front passenger seat, was very weak, and they had their test equipment in the back, correct? In the back seat, and they had to reinforce the seat so that seat wouldn't damage their test equipment right behind it.
Exactly. For 20 years, for 20 years,
they were worried about their machine.
they cared more about their testing equipment than they did the children that they were encouraging parents to put directly behind these seats they knew would collapse. See, for 20 years, this seat collapsed in every rear impact crash that Chrysler ever ran on these minivans.
Yeah.
And what you're alluding to is a document that we got in discovery that showed that they were bracing the front seats to protect the testing equipment from being broken when the dummies in the front seats collapsed on top of the testing equipment, right where a child would be sitting.
Yeah.
And despite this, Chrysler never ran any rear impact tests on its minivan with a child dummy in the back seat. So the whole time they were marketing these minivans to people with children, they knew these seats would collapse rearward, were bracing them to protect their equipment, but never ran a single rear impact test with a child in the back seat.
In the trial, you deposed, and we have some videotape, 2 experts. One of them was Dr. Ken
Sachowski.
And he was your expert, right?
Correct.
And then there was a David Blaisdell, who was a Daimler Chrysler safety expert.
Right.
And we're going to watch them right now, but they've come to the same conclusion.
Well, Blaisdell admitted under pressure and cross-examination that had a stronger seat been in front of Joshua, like Chrysler was selling in other vehicles, like it sold in the Chrysler Sebring, had that seat been there, then Joshua would not have been injured and would not have been killed. And Blaisdell also admitted that as more children move from the front seat into the back seat, where Chrysler urges parents to put them, as more children move into the back seat, more and more children will be killed from these defective, collapsing seats going forward into the future.
Yeah, we're going to go to that videotape now.
Sir, you know that over time, as more children move into the back seat, the number of children injured from these yielding seats will increase. Isn't that correct, sir?
I think there may be an increase in that, probably a decrease in the side-to-side impacts that happen if they're in the front seat, and other injuries that happen in the front seat, but there would be a decrease in the, or an increase in the number of children and exposure to that, yes.
More children getting killed and injured, right, sir?
Well, there'd be more exposure, which I suppose could translate to that. We don't know.
That translates into real deaths and injuries, doesn't it, sir?
It could, sure.
Dr. Sachowski, from an engineering point of view, what has happened in the past with the failures of these minivan seats and the injuries to those in them and behind them, and deaths of those in them and behind them, tell you as an engineer is going to happen in the future unless that problem is addressed.
You're going to continue to see fatal and serious injuries to both front and rear occupants unless that problem is improved.
For 20 years, they've been marketing this minivan as family-safe vehicles, safe family vehicles.
In fact, we introduced in evidence a number of their advertisements. In some of their advertisements, they said that they designed the minivan expressly for children. They describe it as a family room on wheels. They included an advertisement that showed a little crayon drawing a child had done and said, "We designed this vehicle for children." And each and every one of these parents who'd had their child injured or killed by a collapsing seat had no idea of the danger. They thought they were buying a safe family minivan to put their kids in, to strap them in car seats right where they're supposed to be. And this can happen. It's frankly appalling.
You know, as a result of these kinds of lawsuits, this was a big verdict, $105 million, and we're going to get into later the route that it took up the legal ladder up to the U.S. Supreme Court. But when these kind of verdicts come down, does it cause the automobile manufacturers to say, we got to make some changes?
Well, you know, it should, but I'm not sure it really does.
Yeah.
Because for them, so much of this is a cost of doing business.
Sure.
It's actually cheaper for them, and they make this calculation, cheaper for them not to fix the problem and pay the claims than it is to fix the problem and warn people about what's out there and what to do to avoid these kind of injuries to their children. So it should make a difference, but oftentimes it doesn't.
Do you have any idea what it would have cost to make this change?
Basically, Chrysler's own internal document showed that they could double the strength of the seat, which would have made a difference in this crash, for about $7 per seat. Mm-hmm. That is to include a double recliner instead of a single-sided recliner. So $7 per seat, 2 front seats, 7 million minivans on the road. That was approximately $98 million, which coincidentally happens to be the number that the jury chose, $98 million for the punitive damages part of the verdict.
Coincidentally, or did you point that out to the jury?
Well, the jury heard the evidence.
Yeah. I mean, were they aware of the fact that had they invested this additional $7, they would have made $98 million?
The document that showed Chrysler had not put the double-sided recliner in as a result of the cost of that, and the cost was only $7 per seat, was in evidence in the case, and the jury had that in front of them.
Mm-hmm.
And the jury was also aware that there were 7 million minivans on the road that had this particular problem. So there were 7 million families out there with minivans who potentially could have their children injured in a case just like Joshua, who had no idea about this problem.
So my question is, here we are in 2009, some of those minivans are still rolling around on the roads. Have they all been recalled to strengthen the seat?
No, none of them have been recalled, and that is the greatest tragedy of all of this.
So theoretically, if someone was injured right now, they could use this case to get a great verdict, couldn't they?
Well, they could certainly use the evidence that we developed in this case, but that's a terrible tragedy, almost a ticking time bomb waiting to happen. There are 7 million of these vehicles still on the road, and parents don't know about this danger. Chrysler hasn't warned anybody. They haven't fixed the seats. And just as their expert admitted, children are going to continue to be brain damaged and killed when these seats collapse in the wrecks that we know are going to happen.
And even if Chrysler didn't want to fix the problem by warning parents and saying, if you want to put a child in one of our minivans, put them behind a seat that is unoccupied, because an unoccupied seat won't collapse. That could help parents make decisions about their children's safety. Or put the children in the third row in the middle where they would not be in the way of a collapsing front seat. But they even refuse to give that kind of information to parents so they can decide what kind of risk they want to expose their children to.
I'm amazed that the government didn't make them strengthen or recall every Dodge Caravan or similar vehicle made under a different name and had that seat strengthened.